In a modern single-family home in the quiet suburbs of Vermont, Lynette Wilson lived with her 6-year-old daughter Avery. Outside the windows, red and gold leaves danced in the air, signaling the end of autumn and the approaching winter. "Avery, breakfast is ready," Lynette called from the kitchen. She had already prepared for work, and her laptop screen displayed today's schedule. "Coming." The sound of small feet scampering down the stairs echoed through the house. Avery appeared with her blonde hair in disarray, still wearing her pink unicorn pajamas. Lynette couldn't help but smile. Avery's brightness was her reason for living. Lynette had once worked as a nurse at the local general hospital, but now she worked from home as a freelance medical consultant. It was a choice she'd made after her divorce, to spend more time with her daughter. "What are you doing at school today?" Lynette asked as she placed pancakes and fruit in front of Avery. "We're going to draw pictures of our families in art class," Avery answered, her mouth full of pancake. "Can I draw Daddy too?" Lynette's hands froze for a moment. Though 3 years had passed since the divorce, she still felt a tightness in her chest whenever her ex-husband David's name came up. David had once been a respected architect in the area. When they met, he was a talented young man, and they fell in love at first sight. But as he was assigned larger projects one after another, David gradually changed. What began as excessive stress developed into alcohol dependence. Then came the heated arguments when he was drunk. Watching her husband become increasingly mentally unstable, Lynette finally decided to leave. "Of course, Avery. You can draw whatever you want," Lynette forced a smile. After Avery left for school on the bus, Lynette took her coffee out to the backyard. The cool morning air caressed her cheeks. Over the past few weeks, she'd been experiencing an unsettling feeling around the house. Sometimes the garden chairs seemed to have been moved, or she heard noises in the middle of the night. Last night, she thought she saw a shadow outside her bedroom window, which kept her from sleeping. Lynette took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. "It's just my imagination," she told herself. But was it really? She took out her phone and began looking up local security camera installation services. In the afternoon, after finishing an online meeting, Lynette went to collect the mail that had accumulated in the mailbox. Among the bills and advertisements, she noticed an envelope with no sender name. Back in her room, she nervously opened it to find a blank sheet of paper. However, it appeared as though something had been written on the back and erased. Lynette shuddered and immediately threw the paper away. In the evening, when Avery got off the school bus, Lynette greeted her at the front door. She knew she'd gone outside earlier than usual because of that creepy letter. "Mom, today everyone in class drew pictures of their families," Avery proudly showed her a drawing. It depicted 3 people, a small girl in the middle who was Avery herself, a woman with long hair on the left who was Lynette, and a tall man on the right. "Is this Daddy?" Lynette asked quietly. Avery nodded silently. "I miss Daddy." Lynette hugged Avery. She hadn't heard from David in over a year. The last she heard, he had left the state and moved to the West Coast. "Let's wash up and have dinner. I made your favorite macaroni and cheese today," Lynette changed the subject. After dinner, while Avery was watching TV, Lynette scheduled the installation of security cameras. A technician would come tomorrow afternoon. Just to be safe, she double-checked all the windows and doors. While tucking Avery into bed, Lynette kissed her forehead. "Good night, my angel." "Mom," Avery looked up with sleepy eyes. "When I was coming home from school today, a strange man was watching me." Lynette's heart nearly stopped. "What kind of man?" "I don't know, he was too far away," Avery yawned. "But he was watching me." Hiding her distress, Lynette said in a calm voice, "It was probably just a neighbor." After Avery fell asleep, she sat by the bedside for a while, watching her daughter's sleeping face. That night, after returning to her own room, Lynette considered calling the police. But what would she report? A suspicious feeling, an anonymous letter, a stranger her daughter saw, none of it was conclusive evidence. She sighed and lay down. Just before falling asleep, her phone rang. The screen showed unknown number. Lynette hesitated but eventually gathered the courage to answer. Hello. Silence filled the other end. But she could faintly hear someone breathing. Who is this? Lynette's voice trembled. After a few more seconds of silence, the call ended. Lynette rushed to the door to make sure it was locked. The next morning, Lynette was brewing coffee, rubbing her eyes after a sleepless night. The doorbell rang, making her jump. The security camera installation wasn't scheduled until the afternoon. Looking through the peephole, she saw her best friend, Carol Johnson, standing there. Lynette sighed with relief and opened the door. Morning, Lynn. You look terrible, Carol said, holding up a box of pastries. I brought breakfast. Over coffee in the kitchen, Lynette confided in Carol about the events of the previous night. Hey, did you hear? Carol leaned in and said, there's been a stalking case 2 blocks from the Carter's house. Mrs. Carter was talking about it at the supermarket last Friday. A woman living alone was apparently being watched for several weeks. A chill ran down Lynette's spine. What did the police do? They said there wasn't enough evidence, so nothing much has happened, Carol answered while taking a cinnamon roll. But they said they'd increase neighborhood patrols just in case. I got an anonymous call last night, Lynette said quietly. Nobody spoke, but I could tell someone was listening. Carol looked at her friend with concern. Lynn, it's dangerous for you to live alone. Why don't you come stay with me for a while? Fred would welcome you too. Lynette smiled and shook her head. Thank you, but I'll be fine. I'm getting security cameras installed today, and Avery's school is nearby. All right. But call me immediately if anything happens, Carol said with a serious expression. And I'll talk to the police too. Fred's cousin works at the Davis police station. After Carol left, Lynette sent Avery off to school. Just as she was about to start work, her phone rang. It was from an unknown number. Hello. Is this Lynette Wilson? It was a woman's voice. This is Principal Green from Davis Elementary School. I'm calling about Avery. Lynette's heart raced. Is something wrong? No, she's fine. But, a suspicious man was spotted near the school gates this morning. When our security guard approached him, he quickly left. We're informing all parents as a precaution. After the call ended, Lynette collapsed onto the sofa. Was it just a coincidence? Or... In the afternoon, the security camera technician arrived as scheduled. Lynette requested cameras be installed at the entrance, the backyard, and outside Avery's window. There have been some suspicious incidents in the area recently, the technician said as he worked. If you're a woman living alone with a child, these precautions are the right call. Shortly after the technician left, the school bus brought Avery back. Lynette greeted her daughter and hugged her more tightly than usual. Mom, you're squeezing me, Avery laughed. Lynette smiled back and led her daughter into the house. But the moment they entered the living room, her smile froze. The photo frame of Avery displayed on the mantelpiece was tilted at a different angle than it had been that morning. Lynette distinctly remembered dusting the frame while cleaning that morning and putting it back in its proper place. Avery, are you hungry? I'll prepare a snack in the kitchen, Lynette said, trying to appear calm. When Avery went to the kitchen, Lynette quickly checked the entire house. At first glance, nothing else seemed to have changed. But then she noticed that the window in Avery's room was slightly open. Lynette was certain she had closed all the windows that morning. With trembling hands, she called the police. 30 minutes later, a patrol car arrived, and a young female officer and a middle-aged male officer investigated the house. There's no sign of a break-in, the male officer said. The window might have been opened by the wind. But the photo was moved, Lynette explained desperately. The female officer gave her a sympathetic look. Mrs. Wilson, I understand your concern. But unfortunately, we can't start an official investigation with just this. As a precaution, we'll increase patrol frequency in this area. After the officers left, Lynette checked the app for the newly installed security cameras. The cameras were working properly, but there was no sign of any suspicious person. That night, after putting Avery to bed, Lynette was working on a deadline in her own room. In the middle of the night, she heard a noise from Avery's room and jumped up. Taking her smartphone, she cautiously headed toward her daughter's room. Avery, she called softly as she opened the door. Avery was sleeping in bed, but the window was wide open. The curtains swayed in the night breeze, and Lynette's heart pounded loudly. She quickly closed the window and locked it. She was certain she had closed it when she put Avery to bed. The next morning, when Lynette woke up, Avery was standing beside her bed. Unlike most mornings, her daughter's face was pale, and her eyes showed signs of anxiety. What's wrong, Avery? Mom. Avery said in a small voice. Last night, someone came into my room. Lynette gasped. What? What do you mean? I don't know, but when I woke up, someone was standing next to my bed, Avery said in a trembling voice. I was so scared that I fell back asleep. Lynette made an immediate decision. She picked up her phone and called her mother, Mary. Mom, it's urgent, can you come stay with us for a while? A few hours later, Mary Coles arrived by taxi. Her mother had sensed the worry in her daughter's voice and had come right away. Lynette, what on earth happened? Mary asked as soon as she entered the house. Lynette explained the events of the past few weeks. Mary listened silently, occasionally nodding. Has he contacted you at all? Mary asked cautiously. Lynette knew who he referred to. I haven't heard from David in over a year, Lynette answered quietly. The last I heard was a rumor that he'd found work in California. Mary sighed deeply. All right. I'll stay here for a while, so don't worry. That evening, as the three of them had dinner together, Lynette felt a bit more at ease. However, while cleaning up in the kitchen after dinner, she received a motion detection notification from the security camera app. The backyard camera had captured a shadow moving around the house. Lynette froze. The shadow was clearly human. That night, Lynette decided to have Avery sleep in her bedroom. Mary was resting in the guest room. Lynette checked the locks on all doors and windows multiple times and constantly monitored the security app. Although they couldn't identify who had cast the shadow in the backyard, there had been no reports of suspicious movement since then. Mom, will you read me a story? Avery asked as she snuggled into Lynette's bed. Of course, Lynette sat beside her daughter and opened the book Avery had chosen. As she read through the story, she could see Avery's eyelids growing heavier. Good night, my angel, Lynette closed the book and kissed Avery's forehead. Sleep with me, Mom, Avery said drowsily. Yes, I'll be right beside you, Lynette smiled in response. She turned off the light and lay down next to Avery. The moonlight cast a faint glow in the room. Lynette stared at the ceiling, wondering how long this situation would continue. The police wouldn't begin a proper investigation without decisive evidence. Yet she couldn't just leave this house and move. She still had a mortgage, Avery's school was nearby, and most of her work clients were in this area. The clock showed 1 a.m. Lynette was still unable to sleep. Listening to Avery's steady breathing, she finally closed her eyes. She wasn't sure how long it had been. Lynette suddenly awoke to the sensation of her body being shaken. Avery was gripping her arm, trembling violently. Mom. Avery's voice was shaking. It was a whisper, a thin voice. "What's wrong?" Lynette immediately sat up and embraced her daughter's shoulders. Avery's face looked pale in the moonlight. Her eyes were wide with fear, and her small lips were trembling. "There's someone under the bed," Avery whispered in a trembling voice. "Let's run away right now." Lynette's blood froze. Her first instinct was to scream, but if someone truly was there, that would be the worst action to take. Taking a deep breath, Lynette tried to appear calm. "Avery," she said in as steady a voice as possible, "shall we go to the bathroom together?" Avery nodded slightly. Lynette quietly got out of bed and took her daughter's hand. Her heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would burst through her chest. Without looking under the bed, she led her daughter toward the door. When she placed her hand on the door, Lynette hesitated for a moment. There might be someone on the other side of the door too. But they couldn't go back to the bed either. She slowly turned the doorknob and carefully opened the door. The hallway was dark and silent. Lynette gripped Avery's hand tightly and stepped into the hallway. At that moment, she made a decision. It would be safer to leave the house than to go to her mother's room. Lynette picked Avery up and shouted loudly, "Mom! Help!" Then she rushed down the stairs all at once, running toward the entrance. From behind, she sensed someone moving. Footsteps. Or was it her imagination? Lynette continued running without looking back. "Lynette? What happened?" Mary's voice could be heard from upstairs, but Lynette didn't stop. When she reached the entrance hall, she distinctly heard footsteps approaching from behind. She placed her hand on the front door, trying to unlock it when. "Lynette, wait." It was a worn-out, hoarse male voice. Lynette froze. Despite not having heard it for 3 years, she immediately knew whose voice it was. She slowly turned around. In the shadows of the hallway extending from the living room stood a man. Moonlight streamed through the window, illuminating his face. It was David Wilson, looking utterly exhausted. Lynette held Avery tightly. "David, it was you." "Why?" David stepped forward. He looked like a different person from the David of before. The man who once had a neat appearance and confident posture was now emaciated, with a sickly complexion and dark shadows under his eyes. His clothes were dirty, and his hair was unkempt. "Daddy." Avery's small voice broke the silence. Tears welled up in David's eyes. "Avery! Get out!" Lynette shouted. Her hand found the emergency button of the security system. "I'm calling the police." "Please, Lynette," David raised his hands. He was holding something, not a weapon, but what appeared to be a small box. "Listen to me." Mary came down from upstairs. She assessed the situation at a glance and quietly stood next to Lynette. "David," Mary said in a calm voice, "what are you doing?" "Grandma Mary." David said painfully. "Please let me explain." "Explain." Lynette's voice trembled with anger. "You've been watching us for weeks. Breaking into our house, even into Avery's room. You're sick, David." "No, that's not it." David shook his head. "Yes, I was watching, but I couldn't talk, didn't know how to explain." His words were fragmented, as though he couldn't properly form sentences. "What do you want?" Lynette asked, her finger still on the emergency button. David slowly opened his hand. There was a small velvet box. "I wanted to give this to Avery." "Daddy, what is that?" Avery asked from within her mother's arms. There was more curiosity than fear in her voice. "Avery, do you remember what you wanted for your 4th birthday?" David's voice was weak, and tears glistened in his eyes. Lynette stared at the box. And suddenly she remembered. Avery's 4th birthday. She had said she wanted a ballerina music box. David had promised to special order one, but shortly after, their relationship began to crumble. Why now? Lynette was confused. Why like this? As David tried to answer, sirens wailed outside. Lynette came to her senses, remembering she had pressed the security system button. Seconds later, the lights of a patrol car shone through the windows and stopped in front of the house. Lynette, please. There was a look of desperation in David's eyes. But Lynette's mind was already made up. She held Avery tightly and pressed the emergency button once more. With a knock at the door, the officer's voice could be heard. Police. Anyone inside, please open the door. As Mary moved toward the door, Lynette looked at David. There was something in his eyes, a desperate look that seemed to want to say something, but Lynette couldn't understand. As the patrol car's headlights streamed through the windows, Lynette opened the front door. Two officers stood there, one of whom was the female officer who had responded to her earlier. Mrs. Wilson, are you all right? She directed her flashlight toward the living room. There's an intruder in the house, Lynette said in a trembling voice. The officers immediately entered the house and secured David. He didn't resist, merely allowing himself to be handcuffed with an exhausted expression. He is my ex-husband, Lynette explained to the officer. One of the officers returned to the car to verify David's identity. Mom, what will happen to Daddy? Avery asked in a small voice. She was still in Lynette's arms. It's okay, Avery, Lynette hugged her daughter. But she herself didn't know what would be okay. David was taken to the police vehicle. When he looked back one last time toward the house, his eyes held an indescribable sadness. We'll investigate him thoroughly, the female officer told Lynette. For now, officers will patrol around your house tonight. Could you come to the station tomorrow to give a formal statement? Lynette nodded. After the officers left, the house was enveloped in an eerie silence. Avery, confused and exhausted, had fallen asleep in Lynette's arms. Mary quietly picked up her granddaughter and went upstairs. I'll stay with her, Mary said softly. You should get some rest too. But Lynette didn't feel like she could sleep. She sat in the living room, staring at David's box that she had picked up. The officers hadn't taken it as evidence, apparently judging it to be just a gift. When she opened the box, inside was a small ballerina music box, exactly as Avery had wanted when she was 4. It was intricately crafted, clearly a special order. When Lynette turned the knob, a soft melody began to play, and the small ballerina rotated. In the morning, Lynette decided to let Avery stay home from school and rest. While Mary looked after her daughter, Lynette headed to the police station. At the Davis police station, Officer Parker, the female officer, greeted her. You had a tough night, she said. We've finished interrogating your ex-husband. He admits he's been watching you and your daughter for several months. Lynette tried to listen calmly, but anger welled up. Why? He hasn't stated a clear reason, Officer Parker said carefully. He just says he wanted to give something to his daughter. There's a high possibility he'll be charged with stalking and breaking and entering. Lynette let out a deep sigh. Does he have a drug problem? Or alcohol? We're still waiting for the test results, but urine tests showed no positive reaction. Officer Parker looked down at her documents. However, his behavior seems a bit confused. We plan to have him examined by a psychiatrist. Lynette had finished giving her formal statement and was preparing to return home when a voice called her name in the lobby. Mrs. Wilson. Are you Lynette Wilson? When Lynette turned around, a middle-aged woman was standing there. She was wearing a suit and exuded a professional aura. I'm Dr. Sarah Morrison. I'm David Wilson's doctor. Doctor? Lynette was confused. Are you a prison doctor? No, Dr. Morrison paused briefly. I'm an oncologist at Grace Memorial Hospital. Could we talk for a moment? Lynette was at a loss for words. They moved to a cafe near the police station and sat facing each other at a table. I have permission from David to talk to you, Dr. Morrison said quietly. He came to our hospital about 4 months ago. He had symptoms of headaches and vision problems. Lynette's heart began to race. Tests revealed a tumor in his brain, Dr. Morrison continued. It's malignant and unfortunately located in an area that's inoperable. Is he? Lynette searched for words. Is he receiving treatment? He refused treatment, Dr. Morrison said sadly. There was a possibility of buying some time with chemotherapy and radiation therapy, but he didn't want that. In his current condition, his life expectancy is short. A few weeks, at most a month. Lynette suddenly found it difficult to breathe. Her head was filled with confusion. David was dying. Yet he had refused treatment and instead had been chasing after them. Why didn't he tell us? Lynette asked in a pained voice. He said he didn't want to worry you, Dr. Morrison answered. And, in his words, he didn't want to burden his daughter. But why break into the house? Why in such a frightening way? His brain tumor is located in the frontal lobe, Dr. Morrison explained in a professional tone. Tumors in this area can affect judgment, impulse control, and social behavior. He might not have understood that his actions were inappropriate. Also, he's been experiencing increased confusion and memory disturbances recently. Lynette silently stared at her coffee cup. Inside her, anger and sadness and complex emotions intertwined. Do you know about the music box he was carrying? Lynette asked quietly. He talked about that many times, Dr. Morrison smiled. He ordered it specially right after receiving his diagnosis. As a final gift for his daughter. Then why didn't he give it to her directly? Why didn't he just call us? Lynette's voice contained anger. I think he was afraid, Dr. Morrison said quietly. Afraid of your anger, afraid of confusing his daughter. And above all, afraid of acknowledging his own condition. Lynette stood up. Thank you, Dr. Morrison. I need time to think. On her way home, Lynette pulled the car over to the side of the road, pressed her forehead against the steering wheel, and cried. Anger, sadness, confusion, and regret. All these emotions washed over her. David was dying. And all he wanted was to see Avery one last time. When she arrived home, Avery was waiting for her at the entrance. Mom, where's Daddy? She asked. Did Daddy do something bad? Lynette hugged Avery, not knowing how to answer. She looked at her mother, Mary. There was understanding in Mary's eyes. Something happened, didn't it? Mary said quietly. Lynette nodded. Avery, Mom has some things to think about. About Daddy. I'll talk to you soon, just wait a little bit. That evening, after Avery went to bed, Lynette called a lawyer. She consulted about arranging for David to be transferred to a hospital with a psychiatric ward instead of prison. This is a difficult case, said Attorney Collins. However, with medical evidence, there's a possibility. The next morning, Lynette was drinking coffee in the kitchen, explaining the situation to Mary and Carol. The two women listened quietly, occasionally nodding. What are you going to do? Carol gently asked. I don't know, Lynette answered honestly. He did terrible things. But he's sick and dying. What about Avery? Mary placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. That's the hardest part, Lynette sighed. I need to tell her that her dad is sick, but how do I explain it? 3 days later, Lynette visited Grace Memorial Hospital alone. Thanks to the lawyer's efforts, David had been transferred here for a mental evaluation. When she opened the door to the hospital room, she was shocked by the sight of David lying in bed. He was even more emaciated, his complexion gray, and his hair thinner. And 4 was connected to his arm, and monitors recorded his weak life signs. "Lynette," he said in a weak voice. "You came. Why didn't you tell me?" Lynette asked as she sat in a chair. "I was ashamed," David gave a small laugh. A man who had already failed once, coming back to cause more trouble. They talked for a long time. Past anger, sadness, and regret. Lynette couldn't hold back her tears. "Will you let me see Avery?" David finally asked. "Just once more. I want to apologize to her directly." After a week of careful preparation, Lynette brought Avery to the hospital. She had explained to her daughter that Daddy was very ill and wouldn't live long. Avery listened quietly, occasionally asking questions. Her young heart, even if not understanding everything, sensed the gravity of the situation. "Daddy." Avery rushed to the bed as soon as she entered the hospital room. Light returned to David's face. "Avery, it's been a while." He took a small box from his bedside and handed it to his daughter. "Do you remember what you wanted?" When Avery opened the music box, a small ballerina began to rotate. "I remember." "Thank you, Daddy." "I'll always be with you," David promised as he stroked his daughter's hair. "Whenever you hear this music, remember me." 3 weeks later, David passed away peacefully. A small funeral was attended by a few friends and family, with Lynette and Avery dressed in black. After the funeral, Avery began to sleep every night listening to the tune of the music box. Sometimes she would ask, "Is Daddy watching from heaven?" But gradually, normalcy returned. A year after David's death, Lynette received a sketchbook from one of his former colleagues. It was a collection of final designs David had drawn after learning of his illness. When she turned to the last page, there was a design for a small house for Avery. Titled Avery's Secret Base, the blueprint was filled with meticulous details. With the help of an architect friend of David's, Lynette built a small playhouse in the garden according to those designs. "This is the last present from Daddy," Lynette told Avery. Inside the new playhouse, Avery turned the music box. As its gentle melody filled the room, Lynette watched her daughter through the window. She understood that a real family is not defined by its form but is bound by love and forgiveness. Though memories of fear and anger sometimes returned, Lynette and Avery had begun to move forward. The melody of the music box reminded them that even in suffering, there is beauty.